Welcome to the Splendid Sampler 2 Sew Along with Jenni Smith. This week's block is called Big Sun, and the tricky part about it is making these units here, these rectangular units that are made up of 4 triangles coming together, as you can see here. So there are ways to make it easier. They're small pieces to cut out, but if you follow along with the video, then I will show you the best way to be as accurate as you can. So I have cut my template out in plastic template. It is a symmetrical shape, this obviously, so you can just make sure that that is symmetrical as well. And then I've used this template onto my fabric to draw around there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut half of these out in one colour, and I've just layered up my strips that I've cut here so I can go on with the rotary cutter and my ruler and cut out them. I think I'll be more accurate actually cutting them out at the same time than doing it with scissors by hand and potentially getting the shape wrong as I go. And you've got the A triangle, which I've made the template for, and then I've just penciled this again. I'm layering up the layers, so they're the 2-inch squares that you've already cut out that you then use for these templates, and I can just straighten up those edges now as I rotary cut. What you need to be aware when you're matching these points is that you want, if I show you with the template, you want in this point here to match with the top of the triangle on B. So obviously if you were to put a pin through here, you want to ensure it goes through at the right place, and what you'll find with that is that there's a very tiny overhang here and equally a little tiny overhang here. It's very slight because the edges have been blunted off on the template here. You haven't got the dog ears so you can see them, but if it's easier, what I could also recommend doing for accuracy is just getting a 1/4 inch ruler and transferring the shape back onto the wrong side of your pieces, and then again you can just do that matching and pin as well. So marking the seam allowance has definitely enabled me to get these shapes even now, so that then when I join the two together, the point of reference here is going to be where this line crosses here at the centre, that when you pin through there you want to be at exactly the same point at the back, like so, and then the rest of the seam you will be able to align and pin, and then once you've machined all the way across that centre diagonal, that will have that rectangular segment finished. Okay, so I have moved to my home studio now to finish this off, different cutting mat, but here we go. This is the layout here. I'm going for a simpler colour story today, so I'm going to use the same accents, a dark blue for here and for these blocks across the corners. So I'm making my half square triangle units all out of the dark blue, which is underneath here, and the cream background colour. I'm also keeping that to one colour. So these half square triangle units, it's not the case that on somewhere you stitch either side and then cut on the line and create 2 half square triangles. It's you're sewing on the line, cutting a seam allowance, so this is only creating 1 half square triangle, and I think that's because we're working on such a small scale really. So I've got all those just penciled up, or you can use the washi tape trick I've shown you in other blocks. But again, I'm just really trying to be as accurate as I can on this block, so I'm kind of not giving it anything up to chance once I get over to the sewing machine. On the rectangles, these are more snowball corners, but again, stitching actually on the line, trimming away the seam allowance and pressing those back there. And then on all the smaller templates, I have drawn in all of my seam allowances so I can match those points as I showed you before, and end up with 4 of these units here, and then I can start to assemble the block. That's the colour that I've decided works quite well there for my Aurifil thread for piecing, so over to the machine I go. I've stitched and pressed my half square triangles there, and then in step 7 making the centre. So obviously you join the square that's 2.5 inches first of all to your shorter strips here, and then once you've pressed these strips, these snowball corners on the rectangles, you stretch and pin and sew along there. So obviously the lines here, this seam allowance here, will disappear once it's stitched in to the next borders which you're going to create. This should measure 4.5 inches square, so I've had to give mine a really good press. I seem to be okay width-wise looking at it this way, but I've just struggled. I'm just a little bit short for some reason on this corner here, so maybe I wasn't as accurate making this half square triangle, well, the snowball, sorry, across this corner. But I think I'll be able to, because I'm aware of it when I'm joining it, that I might just have to have a slightly skinnier seam allowance on that part of the block. But I think with this block it's just good to measure at each stage so that you're aware of what you need to do to keep it on track. So a definite tip is, as it says in the instructions, definitely press those seams, that long diagonal seam open, so that these units lay as flat as can be. And then I've just laid out the block here so that I can get a sense of how it works. So like I say, I've gone for picking up the same accents here with these half square triangles, the dark blue to go across each corner, and then these units could either be this way so that the lighter blue is radiating outwards, or obviously I've just had a little look at it as well, the opposite way with those coming inwards. So a bit of a choice there. And sometimes I think with a block like this, when you get to this stage, you can be a little bit tired or impatient to finish, and that's usually when you make a mistake. So I'm looking at this and double checking it's fine before I start to construct it. And obviously what you'll do is build it up. So these 3 units together, and press the seams and add them onto the central unit, and the same at this side, and then create your longer units top and bottom. So sewing all these together, and then the same here, and then it will be done. So a lot of piecing, a lot of different elements for one 6.5 inch block, but I think it's going to work, so I'm feeling relieved. Really, when you're sewing these together, you need to be mindful that you're trying to get those points aligned there. That one I'm just slightly out, but essentially then when it goes into here with your 1/4 inch seam, it will come straight down there. So that if you can do that, then that is preferable. So now it's a case of obviously pinning and making sure these joins all align, pressing the seam allowance. I'm nesting seams as I go, apart from the seams are pressed open on the back of these diagonals, like I said, but the rest of the time now I'm nesting them so these are in opposite directions and there's not too much bulk. And then pin this to fit across the top and the bottom. Right, so I am done. When I was putting on these last rows here, you're matching, you're trying to make sure that these points are going to match here and then also here. So there's quite a lot to keep an eye on, and I would recommend with a project like that, I obviously pinned, but I also sometimes just stitch along the seam with a bigger stitch length than I would normally piece a quilt block with. So go along at say 3.5, so that you can just ensure that is all matching up nicely. So it's almost like basting it like you would when you're sewing a garment in a way. And then if you have to unpick it or move a bit, you haven't got a tiny stitch to unpick, and then you can just go back in and go over with a smaller stitch length. So definitely a tricky block, I think. It requires some staying power. It's not perfect. My actual outer edges, you can see I've gone a little bit awry here, but I have got this 1/4 inch seam allowance as always when you're sewing the blocks together or adding the sashing on the finished quilt, so I think I can get away with that. So a good one to challenge your brain cells and measuring skills. I think I might go and have a glass of wine now.